On a desolate, frozen world, a young alien, abandoned by her own kind, fights to survive the unrelenting cold. But her struggle for survival takes an unexpected turn when a group of humans crash lands on her planet. Together, they'll face unimaginable dangers: alien pirates, deadly terrain, and ancient secrets that could change everything. What happens when they discover a long-forgotten communication station? And when a rescue from Earth seems impossible, how far will they go to survive? The stakes are higher than ever, and the truth? It's more mysterious and more thrilling than you can imagine. Welcome to Galactic Conundrums, where the boundaries of reality blur and the secrets of the universe await. Don't miss out on this epic journey. Like, share, and subscribe now to stay on the edge of your seat with every twist and turn. Trust us, you won't want to miss what comes next. Lena Carter, alone on the frozen wasteland of Argos, stood as the last remnants of her people vanished into the cruel winds. The ice planet, with its endless stretches of white snow and towering, jagged peaks, had become her prison. The very air itself felt sharp, biting, as if it sought to tear away any warmth she still clung to. The cold seeped into her bones, numbing her spirit as much as her body. Her pale blue skin, a rare feature among her kind, was stark against the pure white backdrop. She had been left behind, abandoned by her own people. They had deemed her too weak to endure the journey ahead, a journey to a new world, one that promised warmth and a chance for survival. At only 16 cycles old, Lena had been left to face the relentless elements of Argos alone, her hopes frozen as solid as the icy ground beneath her feet. The winds howled across the peaks, howling like distant wolves, biting at her face and whipping her long white hair around her, obscuring her already limited vision. She tugged her thin cloak tighter, but it offered little protection. Every step felt like an eternity, her legs trembling from the combination of exhaustion and the unforgiving cold. The storm raged on, as though mocking her fragile existence. Then, as she stumbled through the thickening snow, something caught her eye: a dark void in the side of the mountain. It was an entrance, a narrow cave opening hidden beneath the rocky outcropping. The promise of shelter, of warmth, was too much to ignore. With what little strength she had left, Lena dragged herself into the cave, collapsing onto the cold, jagged floor. Her body, worn and broken, gave way to unconsciousness. The last thought in her mind as the darkness consumed her was that at least, for now, she would die with a roof over her head. The storm outside roared louder, shaking the very walls of the cave. But inside, there was only the silence of her breath and the distant echoes of her thoughts. The howling winds of Argos fell silent for a brief moment, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. It was then that Lena heard the thunderous crack of metal tearing through the atmosphere, followed by a deafening roar. The ground trembled beneath her, shaking loose fragments of stone from the walls of her cave. She stood frozen, the harsh wind biting her skin, eyes wide with disbelief. From the dim light of the cave entrance, she could see the flickering lights and plumes of smoke that stained the sky. A ship, massive and smoking, spiraled down through the storm clouds, its engines sputtering, before crashing with a violent thud into the mountainside. It was an alien ship, but not of her kind. This was something new. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she stumbled toward the edge of the cave. The silhouette of the wreckage was clear against the swirling snow, a ship shattered into pieces, lying like a broken creature on the icy terrain. Smoke billowed from the wreck, mixing with the wind, creating an ominous, choking haze. The fire inside the wreckage flickered and crackled, casting strange shadows across the barren landscape. Out of the darkness, figures began to emerge, stumbling clumsily through the snow. They were not like the Argon people, not at all. Their bodies were too frail, their movements too erratic. Lena squinted against the smoke and snow, her heart racing. Humans. She had heard stories of the myths, perhaps, but never thought she would see one with her own eyes. The first one she saw was tall, his dark hair cut close to his scalp. His face was set in a stern expression, his eyes scanning the surroundings with a sharp intensity. A leader, perhaps. His hand rested on the weapon at his side, as if prepared for any threat that might appear. The others followed, more slowly, dazed by the crash. Their eyes flicked between each other, unsure of where to go. The snow continued to fall, thick and relentless, covering the ground with an ever-deepening blanket. The temperature plummeted further, making it clear that survival was no longer guaranteed. Lena's pulse quickened, a surge of urgency pushing her forward. She had seen how these humans struggled, how they shivered in the cold, their clothing ill-suited for Argos' brutal climate. If they didn't find shelter soon, they would be as good as dead. Her mind raced as she weighed the decision. She could stay hidden, keep herself safe from these strangers. Who were they to her? Or she could step forward and offer her help. The latter seemed impossible, dangerous even, but something within her stirred. A strange sense of connection, of shared fate, compelled her to act. Taking a deep breath, Lena stepped out of the cave, the snow crunching beneath her feet. She raised her hands, palms outward in a gesture of peace. Her voice, tentative and uncertain, broke the icy silence. "Hello, do you need help?" she called out in the tongue of her people, though her words were laced with uncertainty. The humans froze. All motion ceased as they turned toward her, their gazes piercing through the swirling snow. The tall one, Jake, she thought, tensed, his fingers inching toward the weapon at his side. He approached cautiously, his gray eyes narrowing as he studied her with suspicion. "Who are you?" His voice was low and measured, like a man used to command, his words carrying an air of authority. "What are you doing here?" Lena hesitated, the weight of his gaze making her stomach twist. She had to answer. She had to offer them something, anything. "My name is Lena Carter," she said softly, her voice trembling with both fear and resolve. "I'm from Argos, this is my home planet." She paused, looking down at her feet, her words catching in her throat. They left me behind when they evacuated." She swallowed hard, pushing back the sting in her eyes. I was deemed too weak to survive the journey, but I'm still here. Jake's face softened slightly, the hard lines of his expression easing just enough to show a flicker of sympathy. He glanced back at his crew, then returned his gaze to her. We've been stranded here, he said, his voice now tinged with exhaustion. Our ship was attacked. We need shelter, quickly. Can you help us? Lena felt a flutter in her chest. The uncertainty that had clouded her mind began to clear. They weren't so different after all. She had been abandoned, left to perish in this world just as they had been thrown into it, helpless and lost. Without another word, she nodded. I know a place, she said quietly, turning and leading them back to the cave, feeling the weight of their eyes on her as they followed. Her heart pounded in her chest, not just from the cold or the danger, but from something else, something more personal. Could she trust them? Could she allow herself to hope for something better in a world so cold and uncaring? As she led them deeper into the wilderness, she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this decision would change everything. Did you enjoy this story? Do you think their journey has only just begun? Or is there so much more waiting for them out there? Leave your comment below. Galactic Conundrums always wants to hear your thoughts. Let's keep the story going. The wind howled relentlessly, its icy claws scraping across the snow-drenched landscape like 1,000 whispers from the abyss. Inside the cave, the warmth of their makeshift fire was the only thing standing between the group and the deadly cold of Argos. The storm outside raged with a ferocity that seemed almost alive, and Lena could feel the power of it vibrating through the walls of the cave. It wasn't just the cold, it was the world itself, fighting against their very existence. Lena moved with quiet precision, her fingers deftly working as she showed the humans how to use the bioluminescent fungi growing on the cave walls. The soft glow they emitted would provide them with much needed light, but the real secret lay in the strange, frozen plants that Lena had once relied on for survival. She led them to the glacier plants nearby, their spiny leaves thick and tough, yet flexible enough to bend into sheets. These will help insulate the cave, Lena explained, her voice calm and steady, despite the cold that bit at her skin. The leaves are tough and absorb the moisture from the air, which helps keep the warmth inside. You'll need to layer them carefully along the walls, and seal the entrance with a thick layer to keep the wind out. Jake watched her as she worked. At first, his gaze had been full of suspicion, but now, there was a hint of respect in his eyes. He had seen her skills, her knowledge of Argos and its unforgiving nature. She wasn't just another survivor, she was a lifeline, and it was becoming more and more evident that their survival depended on her. The more he observed her, the more he realized how wrong he had been to underestimate her. Lena moved with grace, her quiet confidence filling the cave like a quiet force. She had grown up on Argos, learned its secrets, and survived its dangers. What they saw as impossible, she made seem effortless. As she instructed them in the intricate process of building the shelter, Jake found himself captivated not by her appearance, but by the calm, steady determination that emanated from her. "Hey, Lena, how did you learn all this?" Cooper, one of the crew members, asked as he worked alongside her, his hands awkward and unsure as he tried to imitate her movements. Lena paused for a moment, her expression darkening slightly as memories of her past flickered through her mind. "Survival," she said softly. "It's all about surviving the elements here. I've had no choice but to learn." Her voice was low, filled with a quiet intensity, but there was a softness to it now, of vulnerability she hadn't shown before. She didn't need to say more. Jake could see the weight in her words, the quiet tragedy behind them. As the hours passed, the cave began to take shape. The temperature within it rose slightly, and the biting winds of Argos were held at bay by the thick layers of plant insulation. The cave had become their sanctuary. The group worked together, their efforts synchronized, though it was Lena who led them. Jake looked around the cave as he took a moment to step back, wiping the sweat from his brow. For the first time since they had crashed, the crew began to feel a glimmer of hope. The cave wasn't just a shelter, it was a chance. A chance to survive. And it was because of Lena. The moment didn't last long before Lena's voice cut through the silence. "We're safe for now," she said, her voice both reassuring and cautious. "But don't let your guard down. Argos never gives you more than you deserve." Jake nodded, turning to her with a look that was no longer one of suspicion but of something deeper, something akin to gratitude. "You saved us," he said quietly, the words simple but carrying more weight than he could express. "I don't know how we would have made it without you." Lena met his gaze, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't just gratitude, it was a recognition of their shared struggle, a silent understanding that they were bound by the same fate. In the cold, unforgiving world of Argos, they were not so different after all. As the evening drew on, they settled in for the night, the fire flickering weakly in the center of the cave. Jake found himself sitting closer to Lena than he expected, the quiet hum of the storm outside no longer feeling like an impenetrable barrier. It was strange, comforting, even. In the flickering light, their eyes met again, and for the first time, Jake smiled, not the tense, wary smile he had worn since the crash, but one of real warmth. There was something about Lena, something that made the world feel just a little less cold, a little less alone. Lena, though still distant, returned the smile, a hint of something softer in her eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there. In that moment, trust had been forged, silently and without fanfare. It was fragile, delicate like the ice around them, but it was real. And that was all either of them needed. The storm outside had not relented. In fact, it had only grown fiercer, as if the world itself sought to drive them into the depths of the cave. The winds howled, relentless and cold, their mournful cries echoing through the narrow passages. Inside, however, there was a strange warmth and unexpected calm that seemed to linger in the air, like a secret shared between the survivors and the cave itself. The fire crackled, its flames dancing in the darkness, throwing long shadows that stretched across the stone walls. Lena sat close to the fire, her pale blue skin glowing faintly in its light, her face still as composed as ever. Her eyes, however, betrayed the depth of thought swirling behind them, as though the weight of her isolation had finally begun to lift. Around her, the humans were talking, sharing their stories of the journey that had brought them to this frozen wasteland. Their voices, once tense and cautious, had begun to soften, as if the very presence of the cave and its shelter had drawn them together. Jake sat closest to her, his posture still rigid, yet there was a comfort between them now that hadn't existed before. He had watched her, listened to her quiet guidance in those early hours, and it had slowly dawned on him Lena wasn't just some survivor of a cruel planet. She was a survivor in the truest sense, forged by the harshness of Argos into someone unlike anyone he had ever met. The group sat in a loose circle, with Lena and Jake slightly apart from the others. Her voice was soft, yet carried weight. "We've all had our battles," she began, looking at each person in turn. "For me, it's not just the cold, it's the loneliness that comes with it. The knowing that your own people would leave you to die, without a second thought." Her words hung in the air like an invisible weight, but there was a strange serenity in her voice. "Argos takes what it wants. If you're weak, it doesn't care." Jake's eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite place, a flicker of shared pain. He knew what it was like to lose everything, to be stripped of certainty. In the silence that followed, the crackling fire seemed to speak louder, the shadows casting long, shifting forms across the cave walls. Lena paused, her gaze meeting his. For a moment, their eyes locked, and something unspoken passed between them, something raw and fragile, like the first stirrings of something that might be called hope. She quickly looked away, as if startled by the emotion she hadn't meant to let slip. But Jake didn't turn away. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice quiet, yet filled with an intensity that mirrored her own. "We're not so different, you and I. My team, we're not just strangers here. We're fighting for survival too." There was a long pause before he added, almost as if testing the weight of his own words, "And we'll make it together." Lena's lips parted, but no words came. The air between them was thick, not with discomfort, but with understanding. She had always felt so alone, and yet here, in the flickering warmth of the fire and the company of these strange humans, she didn't feel so far from them. It was as if they were all walking the same path, through different storms, but all with the same goal in mind: survival. And maybe more. As the night deepened, the conversation turned to their pasts, their hopes, and their fears. Jake, though guarded by nature, found himself opening up in a way he hadn't expected. He shared stories of Earth, the green fields, the endless oceans, the cities that buzzed with life. Lena listened, her eyes wide, fascinated by the world she had only heard of in fragments. "It sounds so alive," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "On Argos, everything is so quiet." so still. The winds, they scream, but there's no life to answer. Jake's heart ached at her words. There was something hauntingly beautiful in her voice, a sorrow that he couldn't quite comprehend. But he didn't need to understand everything to know that he didn't want to see her alone again. Not on Argos, and not anywhere. Earth's not all bright skies, Jake said, his voice tinged with something darker, something rooted in experience. It's not perfect. But it's home. And it's worth fighting for. All of us have our struggles, Lena. No one's life is ever as simple as we want it to be. Lena's gaze softened, a quiet understanding flickering between them. I think I'm starting to understand that, she whispered, her eyes meeting his again. For a long while, neither spoke. They simply sat in the flickering light of the fire, sharing a silence that spoke more than words ever could. The weight of their shared experiences hung in the air, binding them together in a way that neither could yet explain. The wind had finally calmed for a moment, but the oppressive silence that followed the storm felt as heavy as the snow that blanketed the world outside. The group, now more united than ever, prepared for the journey ahead. Their destination was clear. A long-forgotten communication relay station nestled deep within the jagged peaks of Argos' northern mountains. The mission was simple: if they could find the station and restore its ancient systems, they might be able to send a distress signal to Earth and secure their rescue. But the journey was anything but simple. Lena led the way, her form barely visible against the endless white expanse of the frozen wasteland. The snow was thick, the air sharp and unforgiving, as they trudged forward through the waist-deep drifts. It seemed as though the planet itself was trying to swallow them whole. Yet, Lena moved with a quiet determination, as if the icy winds and treacherous terrain were just another part of the landscape she had known her entire life. She knew Argos like the back of her hand. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. The way she navigated the snow-covered rocks, the way she found the hidden paths, seemed almost supernatural. Her confidence in the face of such danger both unnerved and captivated Jake. He had been in tough situations before, but there was something about Lena's quiet strength that felt different, like the calm before a storm, or the unyielding power of nature itself. As they ascended the mountain path, the air grew thinner, and the temperatures plummeted further. The wind picked up again, biting through their layers of clothing, but Lena pressed on, barely acknowledging the discomfort. Her movements were efficient, sure. There was no hesitation, no fear in her steps. The others struggled to keep pace, but Lena seemed to glide through the harsh environment as though it were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Jake couldn't help but watch her, his eyes following every movement, every step she took. There was something mesmerizing about her, something otherworldly. Despite the physical strain, she remained composed, leading them without a word of complaint, guiding them like a beacon in a storm. As the hours passed, the group's exhaustion became palpable. The climb had become steeper, and the terrain more treacherous. They were moving through narrow ravines where the snow had accumulated in deep pockets, and large, jagged rocks jutted from the frozen ground like the teeth of some monstrous beast. The landscape was both beautiful and terrifying, as if the planet itself was testing their resolve. Jake's breath came in short bursts, his lungs aching from the cold and the altitude. He knew the others were struggling too, but they were relying on Lena to lead them, to get them through this. There was no doubt in his mind that without her, they would have perished long ago. His thoughts shifted to her again. The way she moved with such grace and confidence, the quiet strength in her eyes. It wasn't just survival that drove her, it was something deeper. A will to endure, to protect, to keep going no matter how dire the circumstances. Jake found himself drawn to her in ways he couldn't fully explain. He admired her, yes, but there was something more, a growing sense of connection. They took a short break when Lena paused beside a large rock formation, the weight of the journey pressing down on them all. Jake found himself standing closer to her than he had intended. Without thinking, he reached out, brushing some snow from her hair, an automatic gesture born from something deeper than simple courtesy. Lena didn't pull away. Instead, she met his gaze, her eyes holding his with a quiet intensity that made his heart skip a beat. There was something unspoken in that moment, a silent agreement, a shared understanding of the struggles they faced, both physical and emotional. "Keep moving," Lena said softly, her voice low and steady, but there was a softness to it now, an unspoken acknowledgement of their shared experience. She turned and continued on, her pace never faltering, but Jake couldn't help but feel a shift in the air between them. The storm outside may have raged on, but within the quiet of that moment, something had changed. The mountain was relentless, the air thin and biting, but as the group moved onward, something else began to stir within them. The path had become more than just a journey to a communication station. It had become a test of strength, both physical and emotional. Lena and Jake, side by side, were learning something deeper than mere survival. They were discovering a bond, one forged through hardship, and though neither of them would admit it, it was growing stronger with every step they took. By the time they reached the base of the peak, the sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting the world in hues of red and orange. The wind was now a mournful whisper, and the shadows around them stretched long, like the fingers of something ancient and forgotten. They set up camp in the shelter of a nearby ridge, the tiredness in their bones a reminder of the difficult climb. As Lena and Jake shared a quiet moment by the fire that evening, their eyes met once more, and the air between them hummed with something new. A feeling neither could fully explain, but one they both felt deep within their souls. The mountain had tested them, but it had also brought them closer. And as the night grew darker, Jake found himself unsure of what the future held, only that, whatever it was, he wanted Lena by his side. Did you enjoy this story? Do you think their journey has only just begun, or is there so much more waiting for them out there? Leave your comment below. Galactic Conundrums always wants to hear your thoughts. Let's keep the story going. The world of Argos had once again descended into an eerie stillness. The fire crackled weakly in the center of the camp, the shadows flickering across the jagged mountain walls as Lena and Jake stood watch. The storm had died down, but the night felt colder than before. There was something unnatural about it, a quiet that seemed to pulse with impending danger. It was the kind of stillness that made the hairs on the back of your neck rise, as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Jake glanced over at Lena, her silhouette cast in the dim glow of the firelight. Her movements were measured, her eyes scanning the horizon with an intensity that spoke volumes. There was something about her tonight, something sharp, like a blade waiting to be unsheathed. He couldn't explain it, but the sense of danger in the air seemed to have heightened the connection between them. Perhaps it was the isolation of the planet, or perhaps it was the long hours spent together. Whatever it was undeniable. There was no longer any question in Jake's mind. Lena wasn't just a survivor, she was a force of nature. But the stillness was broken. A sudden shriek pierced the air, so sharp it made the very ground beneath them tremble. The sky above seemed to flicker with strange, unnatural lights, and before anyone could react, the ground shook violently. A metallic screech echoed through the night, high-pitched and terrifying, followed by a distant explosion. Lena's instincts kicked in before anyone else had time to react. She was already on her feet, her eyes wide with recognition. "Pirates!" she murmured under her breath, her voice barely audible over the growing chaos. "Space pirates?" Jake's hand instinctively moved to the sidearm at his hip, but he wasn't fast enough. A massive ship, sleek and black, suddenly appeared from the darkness, its silhouette cutting through the night like a shadow. The ship hovered for a moment, casting an ominous red glow across the snow, and then, with terrifying precision, it released a barrage of energy blasts down toward their camp. The blasts hit the ground with a deafening thud, shaking the entire camp. The explosion sent a shockwave through the snow, knocking everyone to the ground. Smoke and debris filled the air, and the scent of burning fuel mixed with the acrid smell of ozone. Jake stumbled, his heart racing, but he quickly regained his footing. Lena was already moving, her form a blur in the chaos. She darted between the rocks, pulling the others to safety, her movements fluid and fast, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Her hands moved with purpose, organizing the group with an almost supernatural efficiency. As the pirates landed, their ships casting eerie, angular shadows on the ground, they leapt from their ships in full combat gear, their weapons drawn and gleaming under the pale light. Lena immediately took action, grabbing a blaster from one of the fallen pirates and returning fire. Her aim was deadly accurate, and with every shot, another pirate fell. Jake watched in awe. He had seen Lena survive, seen her lead, but this was something else. The way she moved, each action precise, calculated, was like watching an artist at work. Her calm in the face of danger, her focus, was something that stirred something deep inside him. A pirate lunged at Lena from behind, but she was faster. In one smooth motion, she twisted, ducked, and brought the pirate down with a swift, practiced move. She didn't hesitate, didn't falter. She was everything he admired in a fighter and more. In the midst of the battle, everything seemed to slow down. Jake found himself beside her, his weapon raised, firing at the pirates who were closing in on them. It was a blur of movement, blaster shots, shouts, the metallic clang of weapons. But amidst the chaos, there was one moment that stood still. Lena, her face lit by the flickering firelight, moved swiftly to dodge a blast that was headed straight for her. Without thinking, Jake reached out, grabbing her hand in a firm grip, pulling her behind him. The touch was electric. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Lena's eyes locked onto his, and in that brief second, there was no battle, no pirates, no freezing planet. Just the raw connection between them, undeniable and undeniable. "Stay close," Jake murmured, his voice hoarse from the adrenaline and the dust in the air. Lena's lips parted in a slight smile, more of an acknowledgement than a full expression of joy, but it was enough. She nodded once, and together, they fought side by side, moving through the chaos with the same rhythm, the same silent understanding. As they fought, the bond between them grew, forged in the fire of battle and the shared drive to survive. Each shot, each movement, each glance seemed to draw them closer together. There was a quiet strength in their partnership, one that neither could deny. The pirates were relentless, but so were they. Slowly, the tide of the battle shifted, the pirates faltering in the face of the humans' unexpected resistance. It wasn't long before the pirates, realizing they were outmatched, began to retreat. Their ship lifted from the ground, disappearing into the night with a final blast of their engines, leaving only the smoldering remains of their attack behind. The aftermath was eerily silent. The crackling of the fire was the only sound, and the group stood in the remnants of their camp, bruised and bloodied, but alive. Lena and Jake stood side by side, their breaths coming in ragged gasps, the adrenaline still buzzing in their veins. Jake looked at Lena, his eyes filled with a newfound respect, admiration, and something more. Something that lingered in the space between them, unspoken but understood. "You were incredible," Jake said softly, his voice low but full of awe. Lena, still catching her breath, glanced at him, her expression unreadable, but the flicker of something deep within her eyes told him everything. "I had no choice," she replied quietly, her hand brushing against his as she adjusted her grip on her weapon. The brief touch was enough to send a ripple of warmth through him, a momentary connection that solidified the unspoken bond they had formed. And in that instant, Jake knew that their relationship had changed forever. They had crossed a threshold together, faced something dark and dangerous, and had come out the other side stronger. The wind howled violently as the small group finally reached the summit, the snow and ice swirling around them like a living force. The journey had been grueling, each step a fight against the biting cold, the unpredictable terrain, and the relentless winds of Argos. But there, in the distance, partially obscured by the swirling storm, stood their goal, the ancient communication relay station. The station was an imposing structure, its once sleek design now battered and worn by the passage of time. The towering antennas, which had once transmitted signals across the stars, were now crooked and covered in a layer of frost. The metallic surface of the station was streaked with marks of decay, the silent witness to years of abandonment. The glowing light from the damaged panels emitted an eerie, dim radiance, casting long shadows over the snow-covered ground. It was a haunting sight, something abandoned, left to rot in the wilderness of Argos, yet still holding onto the remnants of its purpose. Lena led the way with quiet determination, her boots crunching on the frost-covered ground as she approached the entrance. Her breath came out in visible puffs, the cold air stinging her cheeks, but her focus never wavered. The others followed close behind, their movements slow but steady. It had been a long, hard trek, and they were all exhausted. But now, the finish line was in sight. As they entered the station, the air inside was stale, filled with the scent of old machinery and dust. The dim, flickering lights barely illuminated the massive space, casting strange reflections on the walls. Broken screens and panels were scattered across the floor, a testament to the station's abandonment. Yet, there was still a faint hum in the air, the heartbeat of technology that had not yet faded. "Here it is," Lena said, her voice low, echoing in the stillness of the chamber. She moved toward the central control panel, her fingers tracing the old symbols on the console. "We need to bypass the old systems, but I think we can get it working." Jake watched her as she worked, his gaze steady but filled with a quiet admiration. There was something about Lena that had shifted in these past few days, something he hadn't fully realized until now. She was more than just a survivor. She was someone who had learned to adapt, to thrive in a world that had abandoned her. The same qualities that had drawn him to her before now seemed even more powerful, more undeniable. He moved closer, standing beside her as she worked her way through the ancient controls, her fingers deftly pushing buttons and adjusting switches. "You've done this before, haven't you?" he asked quietly, his voice almost lost in the hum of the machines. Lena didn't look up, her focus solely on the task at hand. "Once or twice," she said with a faint smile, though it was more of a reflex than anything else. Her voice, soft and steady, seemed to calm the tension in the air between them. For a brief moment, Jake felt a pang of something more than just respect, more than just admiration. It was a deeper understanding, a quiet recognition of the bond they had formed. They had been through so much together, and as Lena worked, he couldn't help but think about how much they had changed, how much they had learned from each other. There was a silence between them, and as Lena adjusted the final controls, she looked up at him, her eyes catching his. In that moment, everything seemed to stand still. The low hum of the machinery, the crackle of the static in the air, everything faded as their gazes locked. For a brief moment, they didn't need to speak. They both knew what was unsaid. I didn't think we'd make it this far," Lena said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, almost uncertain. "I didn't think I'd make it out of Argos, or that I'd find someone who understood. Jake felt his heart beat faster, a warmth spreading through him. The tension between them had always been there, unspoken, but now it felt like something more, a quiet yearning, a need for connection that neither of them had fully acknowledged until now. I didn't either, Jake admitted, his voice low and steady. But we're here now. Together. Lena nodded slowly, her eyes searching his. There was a vulnerability in her gaze, one that she rarely showed. What happens now? She asked softly. What happens when we leave here? When we go back to Earth? Will things be different? Jake didn't have an answer. The uncertainty of the future loomed over them both like a shadow, but for that moment, none of it seemed to matter. There was only the warmth between them, the unspoken understanding that whatever came next, they would face it together. Before he could say anything else, there was a sudden beep from the console. The systems were coming online, the old machinery buzzing to life with a slow, steady hum. Lena's fingers danced across the controls, her movements quick and precise as she entered the final command. We've got a signal, she said, a quiet thrill in her voice. It's weak, but it's enough. Jake's heart skipped a beat. You did it, he said, his voice full of awe and gratitude. Lena smiled, her eyes softening. We did it. The signal was sent a faint but steady pulse into the vastness of space, a call for help that would reach Earth, that would bring salvation. It was a fragile thread of hope, but it was enough. And as the signal faded into the dark, Lena and Jake stood side by side, knowing that whatever the future held, they had already faced the hardest part together. The harsh winds of Argos had finally quieted, leaving behind the kind of stillness that only the most barren worlds could offer. The distant hum of the communication relay station was now a thing of the past, replaced by the sharp, unmistakable sound of engines roaring to life. Jake stood at the edge of the ridge, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His breath formed a mist in the cold air, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and relief. Above, the stars hung like silver dust in the inky black sky, their ancient light casting a faint glow on the snow-covered landscape. But it was the ship descending from the heavens that held his attention. It was the beacon of salvation, a sleek, gleaming craft, descending slowly toward the planet's surface, cutting through the night sky like a blade. The rescue ship was finally here. Lena stood beside him, her posture still, but there was a flicker in her eyes, a silent question, an uncertainty that she hadn't voiced, but that Jake could see clearly in her gaze. Her past, her life on Argos, had been harsh, unyielding, and now the world she had known for so long was slipping away. Earth, the place Jake had spoken of so often, was a mystery to her, a distant dream, but it was also a place that could offer her everything she had never had. The ship landed with a soft thud, sending a brief gust of wind through the snow, kicking up small flurries around their feet. The hatch slowly opened, revealing the welcome warmth of the interior, a stark contrast to the frozen desolation they had known for so long. The crew was already beginning to move toward the ship, their expressions a mix of relief and disbelief. As they approached the ship, Jake's hand brushed against Lena's, a fleeting touch, but one that sent a jolt through both of them. She glanced up at him, her eyes searching his, filled with questions. "Are you sure about this?" Lena asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, as though the weight of the moment had settled between them. "Earth? It's a different world. I've never even imagined what it would be like." Jake turned to her, his expression softening, and for a moment, the chaos of the past days seemed to fade away. There was only Lena, standing before him, the woman who had fought alongside him, who had made him feel less alone in a world that had once felt so vast and indifferent. "I'm sure," Jake replied, his voice steady, though there was a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "We've made it this far together. I don't want to imagine a future without you in it." Lena's breath caught in her throat as she looked at him. Her heart was heavy, her mind still swirling with uncertainty, but there was also something else, a warmth, a deep connection that had grown between them. She had been alone for so long, cast aside by her own people, but now, for the first time, she didn't feel that weight. The future was uncertain, yes, but in Jake's eyes, she saw a new possibility, one she had never dared to hope for. The crew was ready to board, but Lena hesitated, her gaze shifting from the ship to the world she had known. Argos had been unforgiving, but it had also shaped her, had forged her into someone strong enough to survive. But now, she had to let go. She had to step into the unknown. "I'm scared," she confessed quietly, almost to herself. "I don't know what comes next. What if I don't fit in? What if I'm just out of place?" Jake reached out, taking her hand firmly in his. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice unwavering. "You have me. And you have a place with us. On Earth, you'll find your place." Lena looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled, a soft, genuine smile. It was a smile of hope, of trust, and of a future that, though uncertain, was no longer something she feared. Together, they stepped onto the ship, the door closing behind them with a soft hiss. The warmth inside was a welcome relief, the hum of the engines a constant reminder that they were no longer stranded, no longer alone. The crew began to prepare for takeoff, securing the ship for the journey back to Earth. The engines roared to life once more, lifting them off the surface of Argos, leaving the frozen world behind. As the ship ascended into the vast expanse of space, Jake and Lena found themselves standing side by side at the viewport, their eyes locked on the shrinking planet below. The stars stretched out before them, endless and full of possibilities. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lena felt the weight of her past lift. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but with Jake by her side, it felt like the beginning of something new, something bright. Jake turned to her, his hand finding hers once more. Their fingers intertwined, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. No more words were needed. In that moment, They both knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As they gazed out into the vast unknown, a quiet hope filled the space between them, the promise of a future neither could yet see, but one they would build together. As the rescue ship ascends into the stars, Lena and Jake stand side by side, looking out at the vast expanse of space before them. The frozen world of Argos fades away, but the bond they've forged remains, stronger than ever. With Earth in their sights and a future filled with endless possibilities, they realize that the greatest adventure of all is just beginning. But as the ship cuts through the darkness of space, one question lingers in the air: what other secrets does the universe hold? What if the things they thought they understood about the cosmos are just the beginning? The truth, after all, has a way of hiding in the most unexpected places, and the mysteries they've uncovered might only be the tip of the iceberg. What will happen next? Will Lena find her place in the world she's never known? Will they uncover more of the universe's hidden truths? The journey has just begun, and the answers may be even more surprising than they ever imagined. So, what do you think? Could there be more to this story than meets the eye? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Galactic Conundrums so you won't miss the next mind-bending chapter of this mysterious adventure. The universe is waiting. Are you ready to uncover its secrets with us?